Okay, so what was I thinking while I am painting this painting? Well, first thing is I wanted to challenge myself. I always like to find different topics or elements that I haven't done before and push myself and see, can I recreate that effect in real life? Can I recreate that in watercolor or whatever medium I'm using? And so generally it's a picture or photographs or seeing something in real life that will inspire that, and I'll see an element in the subject that I want to paint, and I'll take on that challenge. So originally this was just a request from one of my viewers. In fact, a couple of my viewers had commented on wanting to have a tutorial on how to draw a humpback whale. So I already love any kind of aquatic animal, except for leopard seals and sharks. They're not my favorites, but you know, sea turtles and whales and dolphins and fish and things like that. I'm fascinated with the ocean, which is one of the reasons why I live here. So as I was looking at different reference photos to draw a humpback whale, of course they're all just gorgeous and unbelievably inspiring. So I took a couple elements that I liked in a few of the different pictures and I wanted to create them. And one, I've never really painted a up-close picture of a humpback whale before. I've done a couple killer whales before, but I hadn't done a humpback whale. And so I really liked how the skin stretches underneath their neck, and how it just is elastic, and the lines that go through there. And I wanted to know if I could recreate that. And the second thing I really saw in a lot of the pictures was where the photographs were taken from underneath the water and looking up at the surface. And when I originally, if you would have asked me the color combinations or the lighting for that, I would have drawn the water itself darker, and then the surface of the water I would have created it much lighter. And what I came to find was that as I was looking at these reference photos, I realized that the surface of the water has so much contrast to the light that's hitting it. There's a lot of shadows, and that the water underneath the surface appears to be lighter, and that the surface is actually darker with just really bold highlights. And that's just the way that the water was reflecting on the surface. And I wanted to try to recreate that. Some things in art are really hard to recreate because they're so wacky and weird that they have to be in a photograph for someone to believe them. One time I took a photograph of a horse, and the way the horse was standing, it looked like it only had its front two legs. It didn't look like it had hind legs, because the way the body was wrapped, it looked like you should be able to see the hind legs, but just the way everything was positioned, they were conveniently hidden behind the front legs. Had I tried to draw that picture exactly, people wouldn't believe me. They'd think I would have drawn half a horse or just missed the hind legs. It's not believable. Unless it's in a photograph, then you're like, oh, that's a cool photograph. So some things are really hard to translate into art, and I was wondering if this was one of them, if I could actually do this. So I went ahead and decided that since I would be using a lot of water and working a lot with this paper, I would have to choose a watercolor paper that was a super high quality. So sketching it was a little hard because when I do my tutorials, I like to sketch things a little bit darker, and of course I knew I was going to erase the lines, so I had to be really careful to be able to find that balance where you could see the lines at the pencil mark and that I could erase it again. Because you don't want to spend a lot of time erasing on this paper because it can damage it. And I think I was able to pull that off. So once I actually started the painting, I ended up erasing most of the whale, and I kind of had to decide, did I want to leave my whites really white, or did I want to just do the background scene over it and then pull whites out? And I was looking at the reference photos. Of course, the white is really diffused down, and it's actually just a lighter shade of blues and grays and purples and greens. So there isn't really a true white. So I decided to go ahead and just wash over the whole thing, which ended up covering up a little bit too much of my whale, and I had a hard time making out where I initially had the flippers for my whale. But I kept on playing around with it, and I had to make that bold decision to make the top part of the surface to be darker, And so then as I was going, I decided to try one more thing, because you know, it's not just enough that you're painting a humpback whale for the first time and that you're trying to do this really creative thing with the surface water, but let's go ahead and try to do something else we've hardly ever done, which is create a shadow cast in water underneath this whale. So I played around with it and ended up having to apply a lot of water to it so it would diffuse. I didn't want any harsh lines, and then actually pull out my highlights using a damp brush to pull out the really, really wet. And it actually turned out pretty good. I really like it. It's not super realistic. It kind of looks like water kind of dribbling down, but I like the effect. It's a watercolor painting, and anytime I can incorporate water or running paint in with my watercolor paintings, I like that effect. So personally, to me, I think this was a success. The second thing is as I began to actually work on the whale, well, first of all, I had to decide if I wanted to work on the whale or on the surface. And there's two ways to go with this. First, you could tackle the thing that you're not sure if you can actually accomplish first, because then if you mess it up, you know, you haven't spent an entire time painting something else, you just messed up that part and you can scrap the painting and start again. Or you can save it to last so that you can really ponder on how you want to approach this. And that's actually how I decided to do it. It's a little bit more nerve-wracking, but I figured let's just go ahead and give it a try and just trust my instincts. I'll do it at the end, and it's either win or lose. So I started on the whale, and the whale has some really good contrasts. Everything is kind of a bluish purpley tone to it, but it can get really, really dark. And so I really have to push myself to get in those darks, because I don't want to overwhelm my lights, but I want to get that nice balance. And because he's very smooth all the way around, there's no really strong edges on the whale, and so I wanted to make sure that I created, you know, where you could see like the muscles working underneath the skin, but not where one shade stops and another shade starts. So it was kind of a balance, a dance with that. I was really noticing that my whites were a little bit faded. Unless I got super, super dark, and I didn't want to make the whale that dark, my whites were not going to balance out. So I decided first to try just pulling in some concentrated watercolor white, titanium white paint. So I just put that in there, and it worked good. It blended out a little bit, but as it dried, it absorbed the paint that was underneath it, kind of mixed with it, and it kind of dulled it out again. So I decided just to kind of, you know, play around with that a little bit more. I was playing around with some of the things and came across just by accident a stroke up underneath the neck, and it created this really cool texture under the whale's neck, and I just realized that that's what was going to be able to create those folds. I was a little nervous because I discovered that while I was trying to create my shadow, and I knew if I messed with it too much I would lose that crease, but I wasn't sure if I was finished creating my shadows underneath, and so I had to kind of make that call. Was it shadowy enough? And so I decided to go ahead and do that. But then with that, I knew I would definitely have to get my whites whiter. So I kind of played around with a few other things, and then kind of trying to decide how I was going to get my whites to be whiter. So then I decided to pull in my white Indian ink and play with that. And that can be really, really white. And because ink works differently than watercolor, I thought, well, it can either make so shocking, I don't know if I can blend it out. So I decided, well, just to try it, you know, win or fail, let's just see what happens. So I applied the white on first, and again, it was really, really white. But then as I watered it down and used it as I would if it was a watercolor wash, it blended just beautifully, where it took on this tone, exactly the tone that I wanted it to. The shadows of the white just took on this milky shadow. So it wasn't like the same dark shadow that the whale's underbelly was, but it was this creamy shadow that would be what the whale's flipper would be. So I was really excited about that. And so then I began finishing up the finishing touches, adding the finishing highlights, adding the barnacles and all that, and decided to go ahead and then tackle the surface. And so first began just putting in the lights on there, and then realized that again I had the surface of the ocean was just a flat dark color, and I realized as I was looking at reference photos that it isn't. As many highlights as there are, there's as many shadows. So you have your base color, but then there's shadows and highlights flickering all through there. So after I put in a few highlights, I went back through and just scrubbed in some darker colors. And again, not sure if it would turn out or not, but just kept at it. You know, you just can't give up. I believe in every single piece of art there is a point where it's the point you hate your painting and you think it just really is dumb and it's not turning out, and you can give up on it or you can push through. And so push through on it, and I really think it turned out good. I think the more I practice with this technique, the better that I'll be able to master it. But I think for the first try, I think it turned out really, really good. So initially my painting was done, but I wanted a sense of texture in the water. If you look in ocean water, it's not just crystal clear. There's, you know, things floating around in there. And so I wanted to do that. So I thought I would do the typical where you take the paintbrush and you flick the paint on there. So I first started, I would flick the Indian ink. So I tried that and it didn't flick anything. I mean, my fingers got all covered with paint, but nothing would flick onto the paper. So then I thought, well, I'll take just straight watercolor paint. It's thicker and have a little bit of a weight to it, so it'll flick. And it didn't. And then I lost my mind. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought I'll just dab it on with my finger and the paintbrush. And so I started globbing it on. And I looked at myself, or not at myself, I looked at the painting and I thought, I've ruined it. I have totally and utterly ruined this painting. There's fingerprints. I have fingerprints floating in my ocean. And I thought that's a great way to end this video. Here's this beautiful painting. Let's put some finger paint on it. So, but I knew I'd done it so quickly that there had to be some sort of instinct I was following with this. I had to have tried it for a reason. So I thought, well, let's diffuse the fingerprints with some water. So I got a brush and put some water on it, and I began kind of tapping around him. And what it did, it caused just this texture to come. And it wasn't exactly white flecks that I wanted, but it caused just, you know, some airiness to the water, and I really, really like it. I don't think I'll ever trust myself to do that again. I think it was a very blessed, happy accident, but I think it turned out. So I still wanted some white flecks in there just to offset, just to put a little life into the water. So then I went back to my traditional, which is to put paint on a paintbrush and then flick it on another paintbrush, and hitting it on another paintbrush causes the paint to go everywhere. And when it goes everywhere, I mean everywhere. Of course, I'm wearing a black shirt while I was painting this, and so now I kind of look like a Dalmatian in reverse. And my desk, if you ever look at my desk, you'll always see these little flecks of white or black paint, and that's because I've done with my Indian ink, gone through and added a texture with flicking it. But it gives you the technique that I really like. So I used my blow dryer to blow dry everything out, realized that also was melting my board, which is plastic, so now my board is all warped, yay! But I found on the plus side that when you apply heat to the tape, it loosens the glue, and that tape came off so easy. I mean, usually it doesn't give me too much of troubles, but it came off so easy. So I think that I might do that in the future. So in all, I think this turned out to be a great piece. I really, really like it. I'm enjoying having it in my studio and looking at it. I will be putting this up on my Etsy shop for sale, so eventually it will go to a new home.